So thanks to everyone who joined us today. My name is Hallie Leinhart. I am the Outreach Specialist for the Center for Financial Security. Thanks for joining us for our webinar, Lift Up, an Innovative Approach to Municipal Financial Empowerment. We're going to begin our webinar today with an overview of the project and then some presentation findings. Or presentation of some findings, and then we'll hear from a participating city perspective, and then we'll end the presentation section with some opportunities and resources for moving forward. There will be time at the end for audience questions and answers, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. I'm very excited to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. We have Denise Belzer. She's the Program Manager of the Economic Opportunity and Financial Empowerment Program, or the EOFE, which is one of several program areas within the Institute for Youth Education and Families at the National League of Cities. Stephanie Moulton is an Associate Professor at the Ohio State University, as well as a Research Fellow with the Center for Financial Security here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Bonnie Ashcroft is with us, and she is the Customer Service Section Chief of Collections with the Department of Public Works and Engineering for the City of Houston. And thank you all for being here today. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Denise.
Great. Thank you so much, Hallie. It's great to be here today. This has been a tremendous undertaking for so many parties, and we're thrilled to be invited by you and CFS to share some of the exciting findings from the Lift Up pilot with everyone on the call today. So I'd like to start out very quickly by saying a little bit about NLC, especially for those who are not familiar with the organization. So NLC is a national membership association based in Washington, D.C. Our members are municipalities from across the country. We provide programs and services that give local leaders the tools and knowledge to better serve their communities. I'm part of the Institute for Youth Education and Families. This area has been around for about 16 years, and our focus is to build the capacity of city leaders so that we can develop programs and policies kind of to help families become more economically secure. We do this in a number of ways, but mostly by connecting children and families to public benefits, promoting financial empowerment via a growing portfolio that includes the Lift Up project and several other exciting initiatives. And lastly, by addressing economic opportunity and mobility. So what is Lift Up? I thought that I would just provide a little background about kind of why we felt that we wanted to design the model and why we felt that there's a need for it. I guess I would say Lift Up has been evolving over the years, knowing more could be done to assist low to moderate income households, in particular cities that have been operating sophisticated financial empowerment programs. Although there have been many different issue areas to explore, we're seeing more cities choosing to contract with third-party debt collectors to recoup outstanding debt from residents. Specifically, this is debt owed to the city for services such as water and power. We explored the magnitude of water utility delinquencies, which is usually a smaller household bill as opposed to electricity or medical debt, and learned that an increasing number of cities were pushing for more aggressive debt collection programs and policies to offset declining revenue due to unpaid water bills. In many cases, we're looking at water delinquency rates of about 30% in many cities that we looked at, and this is a real problem for cities, and this just represents one area where we know that debt is surfacing. At the same time, we also wanted to acknowledge that families are really struggling with growing utility bills and other debts, and the destabilizing effect this can have on communities, especially when cities pursue collections without protections. This is important because cities are often debt collectors, and we believe they have a unique role to play in ensuring the well-being of residents. So just very quickly to wrap up on this slide, Lift Up was created to offer city leaders a new approach to debt collection, particularly for those families who are really struggling to pay down their outstanding debt, despite the fact that they might actually have a job. But it also reconciles an obvious disconnect within the city because through Lift Up, cities can now connect families who are in debt to a wide range of financial empowerment services that we know already exist. So the next slide, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the cities that were part of the pilot study and some of our other partners, including our funders and CFS. So very quickly, To explore this concept, NLC partnered with 5 fantastic cities. I'm talking Savannah, Georgia, Newark, New Jersey, Houston, St. Petersburg, and Louisville, Kentucky. I can't say enough about the commitment of these cities to be thought partners with NLC on this project. Over a period of about 2.5 years, we created the framework, implemented the model, and assessed program outcomes through a rigorous evaluation study. Of course, we couldn't have done what we did without our friends at the Center for Financial Security. Their guidance was so very helpful, and we're forever grateful to Dr. Moulton and her team for being great thought partners with us on this work. And finally, I'd like to recognize our 3 funders on this project for all of their support. I'm talking the Ford Foundation, Annie E. Casey Foundation, and Center for Financial Services Innovation, specifically through its second Financial Capability Innovation Fund. Just very quickly, NLC's Lift Up project was one of 8 grantees to be selected by CFSI for this innovation fund. And between 2013 and 2015, we received funding and in-depth technical assistance to help us launch and evaluate our programs. So we couldn't have done this without these wonderful partners. And so let me just move on very quickly to kind of what Lift Up actually is. And then I know we are going to be hearing from Stephanie next on the findings, so I just wanted to take a little bit of time to just kind of walk through the different components of the model. Let me just first state that in designing Lift Up, we wanted to explore how city government could leverage existing city systems and engage families more holistically through a mix of financial empowerment interventions and programs. To do this, we felt 3 core elements of a framework needed to be in place. And you'll see this illustration here is in some ways just a way of us showing the 3 different components. The first one, which is labeled number 1, stressed the importance of forging new connections for customers who are struggling to pay down their debt. These are payments such as water and power, or maybe they're fines such as parking tickets. As you can imagine, a critical step here is identifying the right customers who may have a sporadic payment pattern and is in debt. But that being said, the model really is encouraging cities to streamline a warm referral process for these customers between the city agency that's collecting the payments and the local financial empowerment provider in that city. And just very quickly, the financial empowerment provider could be the city itself, or it could be a key nonprofit partner that's overseeing the work in that city. Also in the pilot, some cities identified a liaison. This is a staff person who's either at the utility or at one of the nonprofit partners. And this person helped to guide participants through the process. And we felt that that was helpful, particularly for people who are having a lot of stress in their lives and having someone who could help to explain a number of things to them. So the second component of the model, which is labeled number 2, is ensuring the target customer group has access to one-on-one financial counseling and other benefit programs. During this time, we felt it was important that a budget would be created and that a proposed payment plan would be presented to the utility. These debt sessions were led by a number of wonderful nonprofits in each city. Some of them included Step Up Savannah, Consumer Credit Counseling Services in Savannah, Neighborhood Home Solutions in St. Petersburg, Care for Elders in Houston, and United Way in Newark, to name a few. The opportunity for participants to have access to a range of financial empowerment products and services was particularly important for us. We felt strongly about this, so we asked each city to really flesh out this important intervention for us. Some cities offered a traditional 1-hour counseling session, while others incorporated some very interesting financial coaching approaches into their design. And you'll hear more about one approach in the city of Houston from Bonnie Ashcroft in a few minutes. And finally, we felt it was necessary to restructure any outstanding debt that would help to ease the burden for families making current monthly payments more manageable. And this is the third and final, I guess I'd say, core feature of the model. Some cities were able to offer customized repayment plans, while others prescribed payment plan terms. And I think Stephanie will probably go into this a little bit further. From this framework, we asked cities to consider offering financial and other incentives to program participants to motivate payment progress, and also to maintain some form of ongoing contact, either by phone, email, or letter. Again, I think you'll hear a little bit more about that from both Stephanie and Bonnie. And so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to talk more about the findings from the pilot study. And then I believe after Stephanie and Bonnie, I'll probably come back just to say a couple of concluding remarks. So Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Denise. So thank you so much for having us here. We're excited to share the results of the study. And so I'm going to be sharing with you some of the findings from the impact evaluation that we conducted for the Lift Up pilot. There's a lot of information, as you can imagine, so I encourage you to check out the evaluation report. It's posted on both the National League of Cities website, but then also CFS, the Center for Financial Security at Wisconsin, has posted a link to the report as well so that you can actually kind of dive into the results. So I'm going to be providing a high-level overview of what we found with the evaluation. Our primary question was whether or not participating in Lift Up helped improve customers' financial stability. And we measured this by better utility payment outcomes. And you can imagine there are probably a lot of indicators of financial stability that you might consider for a household. But one of the benefits of working with cities and with municipal water providers was the ability to actually use the water payment data as an outcome measure as well. So not only could they use that to help target delinquent customers, but then we could follow payment patterns in the water data over time to see if customers were improving after receiving Lift Up compared to a group of customers who didn't receive Lift Up. We measured different outcomes in different cities. So one of the things we learned early on that you're actually going to hear a little bit more about later in my presentation is that each city has different metrics that are important to consider. So for some cities, it's really about reducing the rate of shutoff. And so in some cities, you have folks that have a water shutoff and they actually will become late on their bill, have their water terminated, then pay their bill and have their water turned back on, but then maybe forget again and have it turned off again. So you have this cycle of shut off and shut on over and over again. And oftentimes the customer is incurring fees as they're having their water shut off and on. So reducing that turnover, that churn of shut-offs is actually very important in some cities. In other cities, they actually don't terminate water services very frequently, but instead they allow the balances to accrue and to become very large. And sometimes they add interest rates and late fees that will accelerate the growth of the balance. And so you actually see not shut-offs that you're trying to prevent, but you're trying to prevent this balance from growing to be very large. So both of those were two kind of key outcomes that we wanted to look at that differed by city. And then also payment patterns. So in some cities, the average payment was once every 3 months. Even though they were on a monthly billing cycle, customers, particularly delinquent customers, were in a habit of not making payments until it got pretty behind or pretty delinquent. In other cities, payments were more frequent, so this wasn't as much of an issue. And then finally, being able to save avoidable fees for the customers. So in some cities, they charge late fees or they charge a turn on and turn off fee every time they turn on and turn off water. We wanted to track to see if the customers were actually saving money by participating in Lift Up. And this also saves the city money. So even if they're charging the customer fee to turn off and turn on water, we were often told that the city actually incurs even more an expense administratively to either physically go out, shut off and shut on water, or just administratively tracking and making the charges on these accounts. So we wanted to track how much money was actually saved for the customer in the city through participation in Lift Up. So the research design, we tried to use an experimental design in each city where the Lift Up program was actually offered to a random subset of eligible utility customers. And each city was able to do this in a way that worked for them. So in some cities, it was based on a random set of billing routes. So they may have geographic areas where they randomly offered the services and other geographic areas where they didn't randomly offer the services, but otherwise the areas were similar on a lot of demographic characteristics. Sometimes it was simply a lottery. So they offered the program to a random subset of individuals who were eligible, knowing that they wouldn't be able to provide the services at scale to everybody in the city. Then we tracked outcomes of customers before and after they participated in Lift Up, and we looked at their changes in their outcomes for those who were offered Lift Up to those who were not offered Lift Up. And that's what we call an intent to treat. So for those of you that are research-minded on the phone, sometimes you hear about an ITT or intent to treat design. And we could do that by looking at the people offered versus the people not offered. But then the next thing we wanted to look at is how did outcomes change among people actually enrolling in the services? So of those who actually got the offer and took it up, did their outcomes improve relative to those who did not? And that's what we call a treatment on the treated design. And there's more information about all of those in the evaluation report. I'll spare you all the details and just get to some of the results here. All right. So before I jump into the overall results, something that Denise highlighted that is very important that we learned early on was that each of these cities was different. So initially we had hoped that we would just be pooling these 5 cities together and having one big evaluation of the 5 cities and the impact of lift up. But early on we realized that each of these cities is very different and their structures for their utilities are very different. So first, if you look at the number of residential accounts, it's clearly different across the cities, with Houston, who's on the phone with us today, being the largest. Newark, it was the smallest in terms of the number of accounts that were targeted for the program, obviously not in the terms of the number of people living in the city of Newark. And then the delinquency rates by city varied greatly. So you range from 44% delinquency rate in Newark down to only 20% in St. Petersburg. Some of this has to do, again, with how much they allow balances to roll over and remain delinquent versus shutting off water, and that varies from city to city. Another thing we dealt with was the frequency of billing being different. So in some cities, like Savannah and Louisville, they bill every 2 months, and that can present a challenge. If you think about a consumer and their behaviors for making payments, oftentimes they are making most of their bill payments on a monthly basis. So having one bill that comes due every other month could create a specific challenge because of the timing of the billing, which would differ for cities that have bi-monthly billing versus monthly billing. And then the last piece here that differed significantly between cities was the fees and charges that were being assigned to accounts. And this actually becomes very important because it tells us a little bit about what are the incentives in place for folks who do not pay their water bills, what's going to happen to them, and that might incent them to participate in Lift Up if they can reduce that fee or that charge from occurring. And I've circled here for you Savannah and St. Petersburg because they actually had pretty aggressive shut-off and shut-on fee charges that were accruing to clients. So every time that their water would be terminated, for example, there would be a charge to turn off the water and then a charge, for example, in St. Petersburg, to turn back on the water. So for those 2 cities, reducing shut-offs actually was a very important thing for both the consumer and for the city. Whereas in the other cities, the shutoffs weren't quite as frequent, and actually there weren't as many charges being or penalties being lobbied for shutting off water. However, there was interest being charged to clients as the balance grew. So there was an incentive to want to lower that balance down to a lower amount. All right, so now I'm going to skip to the next slide here. And you can see the programs that were designed in each city were also slightly different. So Denise mentioned the 3 components that were part of every city's Lift Up program. The 3 components being a referral system for targeting customers, some type of way of restructuring the utility debt that was past due, and then financial empowerment services of some sort being offered to the clients. And you can see here that the delinquent balance amounts that cities targeted varied greatly. In the cities that didn't have the frequent shutoffs, you see much larger balances. For example, in Newark, they went all the way from $300 to $4,000 past due delinquent balances at the time a customer enrolled, versus St. Petersburg or Savannah, where the average balance was more like $100 for an individual. Again, because if they were delinquent, they would have a shutoff. The duration of the payment plan that the cities were able to work out with clients also varied greatly. So, and a lot of this had to do with their standard payment plans in place. And I'm going to highlight Savannah here for you. So in Savannah, if a client was delinquent on a utility account, they were able to have a 2-month payment plan prior to Lift Up. That was something that was set by city ordinance. They were able to negotiate with the city to get a 4-month payment plan, to extend it out for 4 months instead of 2 months, which was actually a very significant accomplishment for Savannah to be able to do that. Because they had a strict policy in place before. In other cities, the policies for working with clients was much more flexible, so they could actually work out longer payment plans. So you see in Houston, for example, and Bonnie will talk about this, they could go 6 to 12 months, for example, for clients that were delinquent on their utility bills. That allows for a lower monthly payment to be made and stretch out the past due debt over a longer period of time. You also note in each city there were different types of financial empowerment services that were provided, and it really depends on the capacity of the city and what was right in that city for those individuals. Everybody received some sort of budget counseling, but some cities also provided follow-up financial coaching afterwards, and some took a more in-house approach, which Bonnie will describe in Houston, and other cities really partnered with other organizations to provide the services. All right, so now we're going to get to some of the implementation. And the timing of Lift Up, it began in Savannah. Savannah was our first city to kick off. They began enrolling customers in March of 2014. The enrollment period really extended all the way through 2014 as other cities began to get on board. all of the customers were initially enrolled in Lift Up by the end of December of 2014. Over the one-year time period, over 3,000 customers across the 5 cities were offered the opportunity to participate in Lift Up. About 10% enrolled. So of the 3,000 receiving the offer, about 306 city residents actually enrolled in the program. And if we look at the next slide, you can see how successful they were at completing their payment plans. So what I'm going to show you here are the proportion of people who actually completed their payment plans or were still enrolled at the time that we conducted the analysis versus those who were terminated for either not making their payments, the negotiated payments, or perhaps they moved outside of the service area during the treatment period. And what you see is really across the cities about a 60% success rate. So of the clients that enrolled in the Lift Up pilot, about 60% of them across the cities actually followed through and made their renegotiated debt payments and got back on track with the utility bills. About 40% across the cities ended up being terminated for not following through on their obligations. St. Petersburg is a lower termination rate, but a lot of them were still enrolled at the time that we conducted the evaluation. St. Petersburg was able to stretch the debt payments out as much as 24 months, which meant that at the end of our one-year evaluation, there was a good chunk of half of the individuals were still enrolled in the program. All right, so now I'm going to share some results. And I'm going to share the results by city because, again, the outcomes differ. So in Houston and Newark, we were really trying to reduce the balances. So shutoff fees weren't actually lobbied in Newark and actually weren't as important in Houston, but balances could grow to be very large. And what we found was that after participating in Lift Up, the customers had significantly lower water balances at 12 months post-participation. On average, $170 lower per customer that was in Lift Up in Houston and $300 lower in Newark. If we look at payment habits, in Newark, prior to beginning the Lift Up pilot, individuals were actually making bills on average once every quarter. And we actually saw a significant increase in the frequency of making payments through the Lift Up program as well. So not just paying down the debt, but actually making more frequent payments as well. And then finally, the probability of shutoff, we did see a small reduction in Houston, but we really saw no difference in Newark, which wasn't surprising to us given that shutoffs were very rare in Newark to begin with. And I'm going to show you a graph. And this graph shows you kind of the change in balances over time in Newark. For those of you that are more research-minded, you'll see the orange bar is the intent to treat, which is everybody that was offered the opportunity to participate. And the gray bar are those who actually took up the treatment or the treatment on the treated. The blue bar is the control group, the people that weren't even offered the opportunity to participate. And what you can see is that the balances start going down for those gray bar folks, the folks that actually took up the treatment, but also for the entire ITT or offer group over time. And by 11 months, that balance is significantly lower. And actually, it becomes statistically significant at 6 months. We start seeing lower balances for folks who both were offered, but then also who took up the treatment of the Lift Up pilot. All right, so now I'm going to move on to St. Petersburg. Now in St. Petersburg, they stretched out their payments up to 24 months. So somebody that was delinquent on their utility bill could have their delinquent payment stretched out for up to 24 months. But they had frequent shutoffs prior to beginning in Lift Up. So they often had folks that would get stuck in that cycle of being turned off and turned back on. And what we saw is that people participating in Lift were 53% less likely to experience a service termination or a shutoff of their water during the 12 months following their enrollment in the program. And this was prior to their 12 months beginning in the program. They also had significantly lower avoidable fees. So they saved those shutoff fees that we talked about, and reactivation fees were much lower, an average savings of about $100 over a 12-month period relative to their 12 months prior to starting Lift Up. Now, one thing to caution here, they actually ended up with having higher outstanding balances from 3 to 12 months post starting in the treatment plan. We think this makes sense because individuals were given often 24 months to repay their past due debt. So if we compare the folks participating in Lift Up to folks who were in the control group, the folks in the control group were back on their cycle of getting their water terminated if they had an outstanding bill. And so their balances would be forced to be lower than the folks in the treatment group. But this is a cautionary tale for folks as they think about if they want to replicate something like this in their own city. Balances may be higher initially for the folks that are receiving Lift Up because you are working on a payment plan with those individuals, and the balances may not go down as fast as if you just shut off water or have some kind of a negative incentive to pay the water bill. All right. One thing with Savannah was actually an interesting city. They were our first program to launch. They had the highest participant completion rate of all of the cities. And they actually had some very innovative approaches to enrolling customers in the program that led to the high completion rate through the program. But one of the things we noticed here was that the probability of shutoffs was actually lower for those who took up lift up relative to everybody offered. So if you look at the bar on the right side, the green bar are the people who actually enrolled in lift up, and the red bar are the people who were offered lift up. And you can see that the folks enrolling in lift up had lower probabilities of shutoff than the people who did not enroll in lift up. So what we're graphing here is the probability of experiencing a shutoff. And one thing to keep in mind is that the lift up payment plans only lasted 4 months in Savannah. So what you are seeing is that that difference between those offered, the red bar, and those taking up, the green bar, starts to go back to being smaller after the payment plan stops after 4 months. The difference between those two, the gap starts to close. But one thing we found in Savannah was that the differences for these groups actually ended up not being significantly different than the control group, and actually the control group did better, and you can see that down below. And we think what happened is that the randomization, they were actually randomizing based on geographic area. And what we found was that the folks that were in the control group area actually were better off, even before they started lift up than the other folks. So we weren't able to detect the significant impact of lift up in Savannah, but a lot of it was simply due to the fact that the control group was already better off, which again is another cautionary tale. As you're working in your cities or you're working in your nonprofits to enroll in programs like this, that the control group really makes a big difference. So making sure that that group is as similar to the group that's getting the treatment as possible before the treatment begins is important. All right, so now I'm going to go to some kind of key takeaways that came out of our evaluation. So one of the things that's most exciting, I think, about Lift Up is the ability to leverage a system already in place to help struggling residents. So working with the water utilities, these are folks that are already making a payment to the city utility company, and if they are unable to pay their water, it's probably a sign that there's something going on in their lives. Water is a very important thing that all of us need, and if we're not paying for our water bills, it may be a sign that something's not right, and it may provide an opportunity to target customers exactly when they need it. And as Denise mentioned, many of these cities had financial empowerment programs. They had nonprofits who are actively involved in trying to provide financial counseling services and financial coaching services to residents. But there was this disconnect between the folks who are struggling and getting them in the door of these agencies. So by partnering with the water utility, where you have a ready indicator of somebody who's in distress and not making their water payment, it just makes sense. So targeting customers where they are makes a lot of sense. Engaging city leaders who can be champions to help put this through makes a lot of sense. However, from an evaluation perspective, it can be more complicated to work with these existing systems. So you're not designing a from-scratch evaluation. Instead, you're trying to use data that already exists on individuals. You're using utility payment information. And it's a less controlled setting. So we work with what we have. In some cities, like I said, we have shut-off fees occurring. In other cities, we don't. So we can't design a one-size-fits-all intervention that we could use across every city and have a pure treatment that we can evaluate. We have to be willing to be flexible. And so the other thing I would caution is administrative data can be very time-intensive for the cities who are providing it. So as an evaluator, we like administrative data because administrative data is often more reliable than self-reported data like you get on a survey for individuals. We can actually see whether or not they're making their water bills or not over time. However, getting that administrative data can put another burden on a city who may already be taxed for resources, and they may not be used to extracting the data in the way that we're asking them to do. So that's something to keep in mind as a cautionary tale. And actually, 2 of the 5 cities underwent conversions of their water utility systems during the evaluation period, which actually then prevented them from being able to look back and get administrative data in the past. With one of them, we were able to overcome it. With one of them, we actually weren't able to overcome it, and they ended up getting dropped from the evaluation simply because the utility data system wasn't able to produce information. So that's just another cautionary tale. The other thing to keep in mind with Lift Up is that we had to embrace variation. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So we quickly realized that each city had unique residents, unique billing systems, and then needed a unique model to Lift Up. And I think oftentimes when we think about designing financial counseling programs or financial coaching programs, we try to find the best mousetrap. We try to think, what is the best intervention that's going to help individuals? But in this case, there's really not one standard intervention that's going to help because each city is structured so differently. So if we really want to target the behaviors that are problematic in a particular city, whether it's somebody incurring large balances or it's somebody not making their payments, you have to structure the program to target those challenges. And so that became something we learned as we were going along, that we actually needed to tweak the lift-up model to fit the individual cities. From a research perspective, that makes it more difficult to then put the 5 cities together and have one impact evaluation. Instead, you end up with separate impact evaluations for each city, which can be problematic if you don't have enough sample size to be able to detect significant effects. But it's, I think, very important. The trade-off was worth it. In order to create a product or an intervention that's going to be sustainable over time, making sure that cities are able to adapt it to their unique needs is critical. And then the last key takeaway I would say that we learned from the Lift Up pilot was the importance of being able to customize the types of financial empowerment options you offer to cities depending on their needs. So even with individuals who were delinquent on their water bills, we noticed at least 4 different types of individuals, 4 different types of reasons for why somebody might be delinquent on their water bills. On one hand, it could be poor money management. So you had folks who simply were having difficulty paying their bills, struggling to pay other types of debt in addition to their water debt. And for those individuals, traditional credit counseling or even financial coaching, reminders could be very important and very useful. For other individuals, though, they actually just had chronically limited income. They were struggling to make ends meet. A lot of them were on fixed incomes. They may have unreliable or reduced wages. And for those individuals, figuring out ways to help supplement their income or cut expenses over the long term becomes very important. The third group were people that had some kind of an acute financial crisis. So we actually had some people that were experiencing the loss of a job, the death of a spouse, a health crisis. And for these individuals, a case management approach is almost necessary to really help identify what the problem is, how they're going to resolve that short-term problem. Simply putting them on a payment plan for the delinquent debt might help in the short term, but they also need to figure out a way to help resolve whatever the issue was. And then finally, there were a group of customers who simply have chronically no income or no documented income. And for these individuals, it becomes very challenging to try to identify what are the reasons that they have no income that they can use to pay their debt. For these, public benefit programs may be very important to make sure that they're able to have access to resources to meet their basic needs like water bills. All right, so now I've given you a broad overview of the evaluation, and I encourage you to check out the report. We go through each of the cities in depth in the report as well and provide more examples of what success looks like in each city. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Bonnie now.
Thanks, Stephanie. I want to give you a perspective from a participating city. The City of Houston appreciates the program opportunity that we had with the Lift Up pilot. We learned a lot. The project team came together from various areas, which helped to ensure our success. We had support from the City Controller's Office, Utility Customer Service Branch, Bank on Houston, Alliance Financial Ministries, Care for Elders, United Way Thrive, and Central New Mexico Community College. So we began by setting objectives that were important to each one of the partners. Challenges, we definitely encountered them. Houston has a large population, as you can see from this map, of low to moderate income customers that could really benefit from program involvement. The City of Houston does not have a financial empowerment center. And as a utility, we talk to customers on a daily basis that are in need of assistance and just not for financial reasons. What we found is that customers have difficulty seeking assistance and knowing who to turn to, when, and what's available. The utility's goal was to put together a program that we could sustain, that after the Lift Up program was finished, that we would still have a tangible product for the utility, that we could enhance our customer experience while reducing costs and still collecting payments. Prior to Lift Up, our payment arrangements were very flexible. At Utility Customer Service, we worked with the customers in order to help them prevent their disconnection. But to put the program together, we talked to a lot of different municipalities, utility service providers, agencies, and businesses to find out how did they administer their assistance programs. And we found out from the information that we learned that we were really very lenient. But in some cases that leniency actually hurt the customers and kept them from breaking the cycle that they find themselves in month after month. And we had a lot of repeat offenders, which validated that. People tend to handle money the same way that they observed growing up. And in our society, money or the lack thereof is not a subject that's easily discussed. It's really kind of a taboo. We had to use sensitivity when talking with our customers about their finances. And there was also a trust factor that needed to be established because technically we were turning their water off. And that's an essential element. Our representatives needed to learn, needed education, training, and be able to coach. So through the United Way Thrive, the utility participated in a pilot that we were able to secure training for 6 of our staff members to become financial coaches. There was a 40-hour program which was taught by Central New Mexico Community College. And during the pilot, we were able to network with other agencies and set up a communication line that we previously didn't have. For a year, we had monthly webinars, which were held for those that were involved in the pilot, where a coaching skill was taught and then reinforced with what they had learned the previous month. And then afterward, from each one, there was always a question and answer section so that they could compare and find out what was working in other areas with other agencies, and it really became a great think tank. We also had on tap a financial advisor that was available for any immediate need. If we ran into a problem, we had someone to call and get guidance. The more people that we talked to or that heard about our Lift Up pilot, the more response that we had generated from business professionals that let us know how they would like to help us, which was really a great thing that happened, which was one that I wasn't expecting. I want to tell you a little bit about our debt repayment plans. The next thing that we needed to do was incentivize the customers to want to continue the new habits that they were learning, and for the representatives to utilize the communication lines that we had opened up between the new agencies and nonprofits. So we set a criteria. We empowered our coaches to do what was best for the customer with the financial validation, which really became a necessary component. We gave people awareness of what the city offered and resources that were available for them to achieve their goals. We communicated with them over several months, following up to allow them to integrate lasting change and become more self-sufficient. And this was really a rewarding experience for all, both the participants and for the employees. So we continue to utilize our flexible payment options. We coach them so they could not distort stressors or decision-making processes that they were running up against. The coach had leeway to do what was ever necessary for the best benefit of the customer, and then the continued customer follow-up, and then a reward for paying on time after completion of the program. So how we screened our delinquent customers is we flagged the customers with the following criteria. Residential customers were only allowed to participate in the program. We did those that had delinquency that were scheduled for a disconnection. We didn't include any vacant properties, even though they might be delinquent. And one of the criteria was for them to have consecutive arrears for three billing periods or more, and then a balance of no more than $1,000 and more than $350. Then they had to have active water service that currently was not disconnected. And the key that we really found that benefited us from our screening was we looked for customers that had prior broken payment arrangements. That way we were ensuring that they had tried to set up something, were unsuccessful, and then we were giving them tools to become more successful. So the city incentives were that the points in black, let me explain the slide a little bit. The points in black are what the city already had in place. The points in light blue are the lift-up enhancements, and then the points in dark blue are the underutilized programs that we had where the utility representative provided technical assistance to the customer, and then we taught them how to manage their water consumption, which ended up in the result of a lower water bill. to just show you a couple of those slides. We have Water Fund, where people throughout the city can contribute to a fund that is then distributed to needy and disabled veterans and senior citizens. And so through Lift Up, we pre-qualified customers for Water Fund assistance. So in addition to Lift Up, they also got up to $100 every 6 months paid on their account. We did a utility review, and if they had any exemption status that they were not currently utilizing, we helped them with that, and we gave them a consumer toolkit. One of the city incentives was to, as I said before, lower their consumption, which lowers the cost of their bill. On our website, we have a CAPS program, which helps them to monitor their bill. They can track it. They can see when their bill goes up. They know what their billing is going to be each month. And we did really hands-on with everyone that went through the program, because a lot of them didn't know the program existed, or they were having technical challenges in setting up the control pieces. So really the most important things that we found were our customer communications. We set up a direct phone line for customers on the Lift Up program. They could get in touch with a specific representative to help them on a consistent basis. So they had one-on-one contact, and that's where the trust factor came in. We offered office appointments. If they worked and they weren't able to come into the office, we did them by phone. We also met their time frames. We did before work and after work. We set up a specific email address for them to contact and for us to send them reminders. We did faxes and texts. We sent them reminders for their upcoming payments and their coaching sessions. And then we had the agencies introduced in a warm transfer. And then we had the coaches support and following up with the customers. These are some of the things that we did to make it easier for both the customers and the utility representative. And we asked our customers, were they ready to begin their path to financial freedom? And because of this pilot, there were some really satisfying outcomes. One individual was unemployed. We were able to help him to gain some skills, and he acquired a job. We just had a lot of really great outcomes, and everyone learned a lot, and that's really benefited the Houston community. And we're pleased that the City of Houston was given the opportunity to participate in the Lift Up pilot. And I'll turn the time back over to Denise.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to just say that each and every city that participated in the project really put a lot of thought into their designs. They were also unique. As you can see here in Houston, we were so excited that Bonnie was able to figure out how to actually integrate financial empowerment strategies into the work that she and her team were doing at the utility. And like I said, all of the approaches varied. The City of Louisville, they focused on a case management approach to the work that they're doing with their community services department. So I wanted to just take a little bit of time just to very quickly talk about opportunities that the National League of Cities sees that we see with the Lift Up project. So the very first thing is I wanted to share that Lift Up really requires coordination and integration between city systems. And Stephanie mentioned that it does make it a little bit more challenging to do a project like this because of the systems that are in place. But we firmly believe that it will help to move the needle in many different ways when you're actually looking at this from a systemic approach. So we are firm believers that local champions such as mayors, council members, and city utility directors are well positioned to initiate this process. Another item I'd like to just share very quickly in terms of opportunities is that I want to just kind of bring us back to the whole concept of a win-win. This study did not focus on a full cost-benefit analysis, but CFS, Stephanie Moulton and her team, they did review a few scenarios, specifically looking at one city, and they concluded that Lift Up can actually reduce costs to the city. In the example that they looked at, the savings is greater than the cost per customer to implement LiftUp, and it is expected that the cost to implement the program would decline if brought to scale. And that's something that we would love to explore going forward if we're able to do so. And then the last thing I'd like to just mention very quickly is that we really believe that the model can be replicated and brought to scale, not only at the water utility, but also in other public and private agencies that collect payments from residents such as municipal courts and hospitals. And so just in case there are any questions about can this model be replicated in other city agencies, the answer is we believe so, yes. So very quickly, just to wrap up, I have a slide that just very quickly shows some of the resources that the National League of Cities, we have this on our website. We created a brief. It's a 4-page brief that really just kind of summarizes the project and the results, and that's on our website. Stephanie mentioned that the full report is available. So the full report is on our website as well as an executive summary. And we're in the process of developing a video that will be available for us to send out to people next year, early next year. So stay tuned for that, as well as for some city blogs that we're hoping to develop with the cities that participated in the pilot. So with that, I'll stop, and I will turn it back over to Hallie, I believe, to start Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Denise. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, Bonnie. Now we will move on to some question and answer session portion. We have a lot of really great questions coming in, so I'll begin. This first one, I'm going to direct it to you, Stephanie, as it's kind of about the data end of things. Do you have any information about the participants in the program, whether they were all homeowners or renters, or what the breakdown was, and then any kind of information about the age, the socioeconomic status, the ethnicity, so demographics really. Was that part of the data analysis?
Yeah, so in about, I think, 3 of the 5 cities, we do have that type of information, and it is in the evaluation report. In some of the cities, they specifically limited it to homeowners. I don't recall which ones off the top of my head. Denise may remember, but it is in the report. So in those cases, it would only be homeowners, and that's because in some cities, landlords often paid the water if it was a rental property, so it was limited to homeowners in that case. We wanted it to be either, if it was targeted to renters, it needed to be renters who were responsible for the water, not landlords. And so that varied a little bit. And they tended to be very low income as well. So we have some of the cities track the demographic information, and we have that. Unfortunately, it's not available in just water utility data at large, demographic characteristics. So that was something that a city had to be willing to collect on top of what was already being collected. So 3 of the 5 cities have that information, and it is in the report.
Thank you. And this next question, I think we might have touched on this a little bit, perhaps regarding Houston's program in Bonnie's presentation, but maybe either Denise or Bonnie could touch on it a little bit more. Just wondering, how did cities promote this program, or how did participants learn of the program, and then the possibility of involvement? And Denise, I'll ask you first, if you'd like.
Oh, okay. So I'll just say very generally, and then I'll have Bonnie speak specifically about what she did in Houston. So because this is a pilot, the cities did not promote this citywide. We went through a process working with the utility departments to identify which customers would be the right customers to participate in this program. And then once those customers were identified, each city decided to either contact them either by phone or some designed postcards to solicit their interest to enroll in the program. In most cases, I believe it was an opt-in effort where participants had to actually enroll in. But in all cases, it was really to a targeted group of water customers who were delinquent with their water bills. And then I'll turn it to you, Bonnie, and you can speak specifically in Houston.
Thanks, Denise. We did follow that model where we set up the group and then divided it into the 3 categories. And then once we had that determined, we just did a random sampling through an Excel program that we had set up so that it was very random as was picked to be contacted. And then we did a calling campaign. We had a specific script that we developed, and we had a company review it and take a look at it and give us tips and ideas of how we could make the program attractive. And then we called and left messages of what we were doing and gave a callback number, and that's why we established the specific telephone line so that they didn't have to wait on the line in the regular call queue. They could call in direct and get right to a lift-up representative.
Thank you both. And I'm going to send a question your way, Bonnie. And this is having to do with your financial coaches that you trained for this project. I think you said that you had 6, am I right?
Yes.
How did that number of coaches actually end up working out? Was that a sufficient number of staff for the participants of this program, or can you just speak to that for a moment?
Certainly. We would have liked to have more. We put in for 10, and but we were fortunate that United Way Thrive was able to give us 6 spots, and we had the most spots of anyone included in that pilot. So we felt very fortunate with the availability that they gave us. And we restructured. This became a real team effort in our collections area. Those employees that weren't on the Lift Up team picked up the work of the other employees, and it became a really good opportunity for growth in our area. So would I like to have more? Absolutely. But were we able to do the program with 6 people? Certainly.
Great, thank you. And then I have a question for Stephanie. Stephanie, regarding the overall delinquency and indebtedness rates of the consumers, did you all measure in any of the cities the indebtedness or the delinquency of other expenses outside of the municipal service, the water expenses? Did you measure how the financial distress of those participants changed in other expense areas of their lives at all?
No, not through administrative data. So that's a challenge. We did talk at one point about trying to link to credit data, but the challenge there is getting permissions from the city. So Denise can speak to more of that as well, but we didn't want to overburden the cities or the relationships with their clients, and there would need to be signed disclosures to be able to do something like that, and that just wasn't possible. But we did do surveys of clients, and we did some focus groups, or actually not focus groups, we did interviews, one-on-one interviews with some of the participants in the different cities, and we talked to them anecdotally about and surveyed them about other outcomes. And in general, they felt like they were able to better kind of manage their overall portfolio. I mean, one of the things you worry about is that they're going to trade off paying their water bill for, now I'm not going to pay my car or my house, I'm going to pay my water instead. And we didn't want that to happen. And we didn't find evidence of that sort of trade-off just in the anecdotal, surveys and interviews. But it would have been great to be able to link to other administrative data like credit data. But again, that requires a level of permissions that we just weren't able to get in place, and we didn't want to trade off that ability with being able to move forward.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm going to send this one over to Denise to begin with, but Denise, feel free to ask one of your colleagues to chime in as well. Bonnie spoke a little bit about the Water Fund program that is part of Houston, and I'm wondering if in some of the other cities, if this was pretty consistent with what their experiences were as well. So how did other kind of emergency programs that are existing in the cities fit into this lift-up model? Do you have any other examples?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we started learning more about the different assistance programs that cities offered. We learned that several cities actually had donation programs. I believe they all had different names, but cities already had something in place where they could provide referrals to, say, a nonprofit organization that would have some funding or resources to help certain customers pay a bill. The issue is that it was a one-time donation, and the challenge is that oftentimes those resources dried up. And so what we saw with Lift Up is a program that was more sustainable in terms of not only helping to ease the burden for the amount of money that a client is paying, but also to provide them access to financial empowerment resources that will help to make a difference going forward. We do know that many cities have affordability programs and other types of credit programs. Those are often targeted to either very low-income families, or sometimes they're targeted to elders. And so the people who we're in many ways looking to target for Lift Up are people who would not qualify for those programs in terms of a eligibility threshold. So we felt that what we were looking to do did not exist in any of the cities. We were very interested in the Water Fund in Houston. Bonnie can talk more about what the Water Fund is, but we felt that Lift Up would complement that Water Fund because it was not actually providing the access to the financial empowerment services. Bonnie, is there anything else you want to add about the Water Fund in Houston?
Well, no, you covered it really well. I mean,
okay.
The Water Fund is available, and it just as Denise said, it has a specific criteria, which is the Federal Poverty Guideline. And we have, part of the reason why we incorporated it is because some of those customers that we were that were drawn into the program, they met that criteria. So not everyone knew that that was available to them. So we wanted to make that known. But the majority of customers that ask for assistance don't qualify for that. And so that's what we were trying to make sure that in the past, we didn't have anywhere else to direct them to or to assist them. And so that's why we really were so excited to be part of Lift Up, because that really gave us some avenues to establish with different agencies, and we found out all kinds of things that we were able to offer to our customers.
I have one more question that I'll end with, and this I'll send to Denise again, but like I said before, feel free to pass it along. Would you be willing to elaborate on how within some of the other participating cities, nonprofit organizations, including churches, were able to work with this program and be involved?
So we left it to each city to identify partners. And so, you know, in terms of the partners, we knew that all of the cities that we were talking to had strong partnerships in place that were providing financial empowerment services. And so we asked each city to basically survey their partners to get a sense as to, you know, their interest in being part of this. Some cities, such as Houston, tapped several different partnerships and had a network of organizations that were providing support to Bonnie. Other cities, such as St. Petersburg, relied on one key partner, which is Neighborhood Home Solutions, to do the debt service session. And so so the National Grid cities kind of stayed out of that process and just kind of let the city pick their partner and to design the program.
Thanks, Denise. And thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, Bonnie, Denise. This was a really excellent webinar, and I can tell by the multitude of questions that are still streaming in that people are really interested in this program. And so for that, I would like to just refer people to the information that Denise provided earlier, where you can find the report, as well as the CFS website, where we have the report and brief posted as well as links to NLC's page where where there's a lot more information. And I do want to remind everyone that this webinar was recorded, and I will be sending out a link to the webinar as well as the slides from the webinar to everyone who registered for this. So expect that in the next day or two. Again, I just would really like to thank our presenters and to everyone who in the audience who participated today. It was an excellent learning experience, and I look forward to hearing more about this project in the future. And with that, we will sign off, and please just stay tuned for our next webinar season, which will be picking up in February of 2017. Thank you.
Thanks.